Yes, so we begin this class by summarizing what was discussed in the previous chapter, where we concluded by saying that prana acts in two different ways. When prana acts in the physical universe, the world that we see around us, as different forces like gravity, nuclear energy, electrical energy, heat energy, sound energy. So these are the different manifestations of prana in the external universe. They act in a particular way, and then we manipulate it and we call it physical science. Physical sciences have been developed by developing the forces or developing the prana. The control of prana in the external universe is also a kind of pranayama. Pranayama means pranayama, the control of the prana. So if the control is external, we call it science. And if the control, that part which tries to control the manifestations of prana as mental force, by mental means, is known as Raj Yoga. So Raj Yoga also is a science, is a psychic science which deals with the mind. The manifestation of prana is different. The Pancha Pranas within the body, they are different from the Pancha Pranas which result in different forces like electricity, magnetism, gravity, and all those forces externally, but they are somehow connected. It's not that the pranas are different. They are appearing as different because they have different manifestations in the external world and different manifestations in the internal world, which is known as the psychic prana. And that is known as this field of study of psychic prana is known as Raj Yoga. The field of study of external prana or forces is known as physical sciences. So Swamiji has very clearly indicated that the whole of Raj Yoga is nothing but a psychic science. Just as physical sciences deal with the forces, different manifestation of different forces, which result in scientific progress. So also, if we control our psychic prana, we it results in psychic progress. Now, what is this psychic prana? Now, here we have to come to some people who are familiar with some kind of physiology. They know that there are two nerve cords in the spinal cord. Spinal cord is made of two cords. So according to the yogis also, in the human psyche, in the human body, the nervous current is passing through the two parallel but attached cords of the nervous system. They are called Pingala and Ida and Pingala, and a hollow canal between the two. Now, the Swamiji is explaining that the hollow is there. When you cut the spine, you take a cross section of the spine, you have a figure of 8. So, between the 8, where the curves join in the middle, there is a small hollow, very, very narrow hollow, which is empty. I mean, it doesn't have any fiber. The fibers are on the lobes, both the sides, and there is a small hollow in between. And the whole thing, cross section of the whole spinal cord, forms the figure 8. The lower end of the hollow canal is what the yogis call the lotus of Kundalini. Now, when you talk of the different lotuses uh, in our in Raj Yoga, when you say the lotus in the heart, the lotus in the Swadhisthana, they describe each lotus as a red petal lotus, a white petal, thousand petal lotus, and all those things. These are symbolical. But there is some physiological equivalent to all these things. Now, this lotus of Kundalini is triangular in form, even physiologically. The, the yogis say the entire Kundalini Shakti, the Shakti which comes as a result of leading a pure life, normally they say that's why they give so much importance to celibacy. So the power which is the power of brahmacharya, the celibate person can make full use of this power of what is known as kundalini. Kundalini is there in varying measures, in varying uh, quantities in different people. But the more celibate a person, the more Kundalini is there, and that is why he has more chances of making progress. So that is why every religion insisted on a pure life. Otherwise, spiritual practices can happen, or some visions and other things may happen by accident, by the accidental rise of Kundalini, but it is not sustained. If you want a sustained rise of Kundalini power, that is spiritual power, then it has to come through by leading a pure life and then practicing yoga. So that is a precondition. Most of the yogas and most of the religions insist on chastity as a precondition to the practice of religion. So that is what this Swamiji also says. The coiled up power, they call it coiled up because it is most of the human beings who are trying to do spiritual practices, it is coiled up. It has to be awakened by the repetition of mantra or other techniques. Mantra is one of the techniques which help you to rouse the power of this Kundalini. Otherwise, it remains dormant. Even though intellectually one may be very much advanced, he may be knowing everything about spirituality. But unless that Kundalini awakens, he will not make progress. That's the idea. Rajoga says, Rajoga is the technical side. It is just like you know all the physical sciences. But as long as you use those physical laws, which are theoretical right now, you have so many laws of gravitation, so many. But when you really apply it in the laboratory, and you get the technology. So yoga is the technology of Vedanta. Vedanta gives you the outline. It cannot do more than that. But after intellectual understanding, when you really practice that, when you follow Raj Yoga, you do meditation. When you follow Jnana Yoga, you do Shravana, hearing, Manana, contemplating. But then there is a third stage which is very important, Nididhyasana. Nididhyasana means meditating upon the wonderful knowledge that you have acquired with the help of a guru or through studying of Shastras. But studying by itself will not arouse the Kundalini. So whether it is Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga through emotions, and Karma Yoga through increase in the willpower. So all the forces of all the yogas, whatever yoga we do, but Japa is the most spontaneous because the mere repetition, if it is done in a very systematic way, it can result in rise of Kundalini. Now this coiled up power, why is it called coiled up? It has nothing to do with the snake. Normally Kundalini is shown to as a representation. Even Swami Vivekananda in his symbol showed the power of Rajoga or the power of Kundalini as a snake. Snake is just a symbol, just as the lotuses are symbols. You say the 8-petal lotus in the heart, or there are other petals, many petals, 1,000-petal lotus in the Sahasrara, the last chakra. So these are the different nodes. Now this coiled up Kundalini is like a stagnant snake. But when the snake is hit or you just touch the snake, it raises its hood. So just to show that when you do sadhana, the power which is lying dormant in the lowest plexus, it's in the shape of a triangle. It is known as coiled up. Coiled up means the snake is still inactive. It's symbolical. But when the snake is awakened, then it rises along the spinal cord. When the Kundalini awakes, it doesn't pass through the other two spinal cords. The nervous current, when it passes through the spinal cord, we have a worldly person. Any worldly person, when he interacts with others and even animals, they have this nervous current passing through the spinal cords. Every animal or mammal which has a spinal cord, it has to interact with the world, and the sense organs take the signals to the brain, and then you find that the brain responds and there is action and response. So when Kundalini is awakened, something different happens. The unused hollow canal which is between the two spinal cords, that opens up. And that is the secret. That is the secret of Raj Yoga, that how somehow by sadhana you have to open that, and when the nervous current, when the Kundalini starts flowing, the coiled up power which is lying in the basal chakra, Muladhara, it starts rising, and when it reaches the brain, as it rises step by step, one layer of the mind and the layer and layer of minds open up. Now you are able to see instinctively, or maybe you are able to see according to your sense organ. The sensory information you react. But as the Kundalini rises, you will find another layer of the mind opening where you start seeing thoughts. We can influence people at a distance. Many powers come. Raj Yoga describes those powers because you are now going from the purely gross level to the mental level. So the one layer, the higher and higher layers of the mind, the intuitive powers of the mind, the supernatural visions and all those things open up, and all the different visions and wonderful powers come to the yogi. That is what Raj Yoga says. When it reaches the brain, the yogi is perfectly detached from the body and the mind. So till it reaches the Sahasrara, that's why they say you go into Samadhi, you are not connected with the brain. When Sri Ramakrishna went into Samadhi, the force, the power, his Kundalini rose through the different chakras and passed through the Sahasrara. When it went through the Sahasrara, the body becomes inert. The body is no longer alive because you are not dependent. Your whole soul, the yogi is perfectly detached. He can detach his subtle body from the gross body. Because the moment the currents pass through the spinal cord, then you have interaction with the body. You feel the body. When Sri Ramakrishna went into Samadhi, he could make this nervous energy, Kundalini, pass through the hollow. And when it passed out through the Sahasrara and he went into Samadhi, Mahendra Lal Sarkar, the doctor, went and checked his eye pupils, he checked his breathing, he checked his heartbeat. Everything had stopped. And they said, medically it is impossible. How can a person stop all the functions? Because in Sri Ramakrishna's case, he had that capacity to come back. Most of the people, once they pass out into Samadhi, they don't come back. Their body falls off after a few days. So what happens when the nerve currents no longer pass through the spinal cord, and as they progressively rise, when they come to the level of the heart, you get a different feeling. You're not totally detached from the body, but things which happen to your body don't affect you. The higher it goes, the more joy you feel, the more bliss you feel, because you are touching different chakras and you are touching different layers of your mind. You are passing the Vijnanamaya kosha, and then when you finally reach the Anandamaya kosha, then the Pranamaya Annamaya kosha may have disturbances, may have problems, but they cease to disturb you. That is the goal of the yogi. How not to depend on the Annamaya kosha, how not to depend on the Pranamaya kosha for our happiness. If we depend on that, then when we are sick, we are unhappy. When we are healthy, we are happy. So we are practically leading a kind of animal life. Animals are happy when they get food to eat. So at the Annamaya Pranamaya kosha level, we are practically at the same, just like animals, because they also eat. In fact, they are stronger in the Pranamaya kosha and Annamaya kosha because when they eat different types of stuff, they don't fall as sick. Their digestive system, their everything is so sturdy. Human beings are very delicate in the sense their digestive system, they can't bear any change in food. There are so many allergies, but you don't find these things. Mostly, you don't find these things in animals because they are so gross that they are Annamaya kosha and Pranamaya kosha are so strong that they, at the cost of developing their Manomaya kosha and the higher koshas, God has given them stronger Annamaya kosha and Pranamaya kosha. They can live with little food, or even if they eat food, they can digest it. There are so many wonderful things they can do with their Annamaya and Pranamaya kosha. So if you say you have a good digestive power, you have a good prana, you can do excellent yoga, you have a beautiful body, then you are no better than an animal, because animals excel even human beings in these two koshas. Human being becomes superior, he evolves only when he crosses these two koshas. The Kundalini comes at least to the heart level, where it transcends the mind and comes in touch with the Vijnanamaya kosha or the Buddhi, the level of the Buddhi. Then Swamiji says, when it finally goes. Now, physiologically, it has a wonderful parallel, Swamiji says. Swamiji says that the spinal cord is composed in a very peculiar manner. If we take the figure 8 horizontally, there are two parts which are connected in the middle. In the figure 8 has two parts and there is the connection in the middle. But in the middle, there is, suppose there is a small hole. Suppose you add 8 after 8 piled one on top of another. All these 8 layers, if you form, it forms the spinal cord. So wherever you cut the spinal cord, you will find this figure of 8. That means there are two parallel strands of nerves passing the Ida and Pingala, and there is a small hollow which starts from the base of the spine to the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata, Swamiji says, on the left is the Ida and on the right is Pingala. That is the name given by the yogis. We call it efferent and efferent nerves, which runs through the center of the spinal cord is the sushumna. Where the spinal cord ends, in some of the lumbar vertebrae, fine fiber issues downward and the canal runs up within that fiber. See, even in the spinal cord, when it branches, this hollow canal follows everywhere. So they say it's very fine, we can't see it, but the hollow still remains. So that means we can bypass. It is like using a wire and using a wireless. Suppose till now you were using wires to communicate or to transfer signals through the wires. Suddenly there came a leap in technology and then you saw that you don't need a wire to transmit signals. You can do it wirelessly. That is exactly what Kundalini is. That is what the yogis found. They say if you depend on the nervous cords, if you depend on the spinal cord, then you are held up with the body. You are attached to the body. You just you're no better than animals. But the moment you make the nerve currents pass through the hollow, it is like using wireless. Even if the wire breaks, it doesn't matter. You can still the Kundalini will still go up and the nervous currents will. So that's why the canal is closed at the lower end, which is situated near what is called the sacral plexus, which according to modern physiology is triangular in form. You see, when these yogis said that the Muladhara is triangular in form, they were taking a hint from physiology because they had seen that in modern physiology, the sacral plexus, which is at the bottom of the spine, is also triangular in shape. Now, the different plexus that have their centers in the spinal canal, going up to the throat and then going up to the medulla oblongata, they stand for the different lotuses of the yogi. Now, the yogi conceives the person who performs Raj Yoga. He starts with the Muladhara, the basic, Swadhisthana, the next one, Manipura, which is the navel, Anahata, which is the heart, Vishuddha, which is still higher, near the throat, somewhere near the throat. Of course, these are all centers lying on the Sushumna canal, lying on at the different levels of the Sushumna canal in the spinal column. And then the 1,000-petal lotus in the brain. So if we take these different plexus as representing, the plexus means there are certain, if you take a spinal cord, those who have studied physiology of the human body, if they see that there are nodes, there are different plexuses, they are called different plexuses. At different parts, there are these 6 plexuses. And from where a lot of nerve endings begin and they spread all over the body. So the lowest sacral plexus, there will be some spinal, some nerves, flowing into some lower part of the body maybe. And then there are others which deal with different parts of the body. So at every level of the spine, all the 6 levels up to Sahasrara, physiologically also there are plexus. It is these plexus which our yogis say is nothing but the lotuses of the Kundalini. The Kundalini, when it rises, it touches the different lotuses. Normally, they are drooping down. The 8-petal lotus where we meditate on our Ishta in the heart, it is drooping down. But when the Kundalini passes, you have to imagine that these lotuses, drooping lotuses, are again flowering, and your Ishta is sitting on that wonderful lotus. The significance of this is that you raise your consciousness to that of the Anahata level, the chakra which is here at the heart center. So the heart center becomes very important when you meditate, when you do sadhana according to Bhakti Yoga, I mean the Bhakti method or Tantras and other. Uh, so the yogis normally prescribe that you have to use one of these sacral plexuses, one of these plexuses, not the sacral plex, which is Muladhara. Nobody meditates on the Muladhara. The lower three plexuses are not important for spirituality. The Muladhara, Swadhisthana, and the Vishuddha. The Swadhisthana, Muladhara, Swadhisthana, and Manipura. These are the three the plexuses in the spinal cord, which are basic for every human being. Even if a person is not practicing yoga or Raj Yoga, still those plexuses are active because he's interacting with the body. Now and then the Kundalini might come to those levels, but he will not be spiritual. He will be just as an ordinary man, maybe more talented. He may be exhibiting more characteristics, but he is still not developed. The spiritual development starts when you cross the Kundalini, cross the Anahata chakra. Now, if we take, he says, we know there are two sorts of currents, nerve currents, and two sorts of actions. One is afferent with an A, and the other is efferent. One is sensory, the afferent one is sensory, and the other is motor. One is centripetal and the other is centrifugal. What it means is one motion of the nerves is from the body to the sense organs, from the brain to the sense organs. The other one, the centrifugal, is from the sense organs, from outside it goes inside. So one current takes signals from the brain to the outside world, and the other takes the signals from the outside world to the brain. So this up and down, afferent and efferent, one carries sensations to the brain and the other from the brain to the outer body. So this Adan Pradan, this transfer of signals or this transfer of nerve currents is taking place throughout, even for a non-yogi, even if a person is not a yogi, even in ordinary human beings, because our nerve currents are flowing through the spinal column. These vibrations are all connected with the brain in the long run. So you have to remember this. The spinal cord, if you see physiologically, is not directly connected to the brain. It is attached. It does not attach itself directly to the brain, but floats in a fluid in the brain, which is known as medulla oblongata. It ends in a sort of a bulb. If one knows physiology, the whole spinal cord, when it passes through the spinal cord and near the neck, after the neck, it enters the brain, but it is not directly connected. It ends in a bulb, like a bulb on the top of the spinal cord, and that is floating in a fluid, and that is where the interactions take place. The signals, and I mean all the nervous current from the brain to the body and from the body to the brain, they get exchanged at this medulla oblongata. So if there is a blow on the head, they say the reason why it is floating is that medulla oblongata is such a sensitive organ that it practically controls the whole nervous system, all the heartbeat, the motor. There are two things. One is sensory sensations, and the other is motor sensations. Motor sensations means you don't have to think, and the heart does not beat. It is a motor thing. I mean, it's the motor sensory system where all these physiological functions are happening without our effort. Sensory nervous system is one where we react only if there is some stimulus. If you see certain things, you get afraid, you start running. So these are activated only when there is sensory input. Whereas the heartbeat, the breathing, and all the other motor organs, they are running automatically. And all this is controlled by the medulla oblongata. So that's why Swamiji says, we have to remember this, that These physiological spinal cord, which we study in physiology in the human body, they have these different centers, plexuses, joints, nodes from where different nerves are start. So these are corresponding chakras, which we use when we talk of yoga, when we talk of spirituality. These chakras correspond to the different plexuses in our. So, but we particularly have to remember the three: the Muladhara, the basic; the Sahasrara, the topmost; and the Manipura, the lotus of the navel. Next, we'll take one fact from physics. We all hear of electricity and the other forces connected it. We talk of electromagnetic. Now, most of the electromagnetic forces can be converted into motion. Motion can be converted into electromagnetic forces. We see the rotor moving, the motor moving, the engines moving. So all these things are nothing but converting of one prana or one force into another in the physical universe. So what electricity nobody knows, but it is a kind of motion. It is a kind of force which is animating, which we use. We cannot actually see electricity, but we know how it functions, how the current flows, and it gives rise to certain different forces. The electromagnetic coil will give rise to certain kinds of things, and so also different light, heat. So they give rise to different physical movements. The universe, there are various other motions in the universe. So what is the difference between them and electricity? Swamiji is giving an example from that. How do you distinguish the other forces from electricity? Now, suppose Swamiji says this table moves. The molecules which compose this table are moving in different directions. If you see, if you take any piece mass, the atoms are moving in different directions. But when you make it move in a particular direction, that's what happens in electricity. When the wire is there, when there is no electricity, the molecules are moving in different direction. But the moment you put the two polars, the poles are activated, then you will see that the ions or the electricity shows a uniform flow from one end to the another of the wire. So they are flowing in the same direction. So this is a parallel Swamiji is giving us, showing us that just as electricity, in an empty wire without electricity, the motion of the molecules, the motion of the electrons are in a very haphazard way. But then what happens is when, just a minute. So the electrons and protons which are moving, the electrons and protons which are there as in the wire, they flow in a particular direction. So they say if all the Swamiji says gives a wonderful example that if the air molecules in a room, now they are all moving in very haphazard way, that there is no current. But if they are all made to move in the same direction, Swamiji says if all are made to move all the atoms and molecules in this room, he says, say in this room there are so many air molecules. If they are all made to move in the same direction, it will make a gigantic battery of electricity in the room. So he's giving one parallel how the yogic power, when the powers of the mind are focused, like the electricity, if it is channelized through a wire, when the protons and electrons are made to move in a particular direction, in a particular flow, in a controlled flow, we generate tremendous energy. Just as we dam the river, and when the whole river is, the dam is full of water, and we allow it to go in a particular, through a particular tube, we generate hydroelectricity. So whatever is controlled, similarly with the lens, we take a lens and then focus the rays of the sun. When they focus it at a particular point, it burns. So it generates another kind of heat energy. So if it is scattered, the energy is scattered. But if the scattered energy is gathered together and made to flow in a particular way, it functions in the same way as electricity does. Electricity makes the force of electricity, it gets its power from the fact that all the electrons flow in a particular direction. So also, we have to remember that from point of physiology, the respiratory system is now we are breathing. The breathing system has some kind of controlling action over our nerve currents. So when you do japa, actually what you are doing is you are indirectly, whether you are conscious of it or not, you are indirectly regulating your nervous current. I mean, you are regulating your breath, and that breath is regulating your nervous current. Of course, the mantra has its intrinsic power also to destroy the samskaras. But apart from that, physiologically, if you see, it makes your body calm. It makes your nerves calm, and that's why when you become more and more spiritual, one sign is that you become more peaceful, you become more composed, you become more collected, you become more calm, because that is a direct effect. That's the most grossest effect you can see in a spiritual person. That if he is doing his japa properly, or if he is doing his pranayama properly, the very fact that he is able to control the breath and breathe in a very slow motion, this breathing, this rhythmical breathing comes a tendency of all the molecules in the body to move in the same direction. So it generates a similar force like electricity generates in a wire. So you get charged. So when you say that there is spiritual power in a person, all he has done is he has repeated the mantra, he has maintained an undercurrent of a mantra. That is why we say, Holy Mother said, through when you are doing your job, when you are doing your work, when you are doing all your activities, let the undercurrent go along with that. You continuously do your japa. You don't have to meditate all the time. You even don't get a chance to meditate or sit quietly. But suppose you are working, you are cooking, why not allow that mantra, that undercurrent of the mantra to flow continuously? What happens is these nerve currents, they change in a motion which is similar to electricity, and that gives you, that charges you. That gives you not just physically, it doesn't charge you. It's not that it will make you physically strong, but it will make you spiritually charged. It will make you happy, it will make you joyful, it will make you empowered, feel empowered, it will give you strength. So Swamiji is giving an example. Just as we direct all the electrons and protons to flow in the wire, and in the process generate electricity which can be used for good purposes, so also if we practice spirituality, if we practice Raj Yoga, if we practice pranayama, either independently or indirectly, or I mean effortlessly by repeating the japa, because the moment there is rhythm in repetition of your mantra, it regulates your breathing. And with every repetition of the mantra has its own power plus the power of the pranayama. Both of them, they take charge of your nerve currents, and then first of all bring about some physiological change or some mental change. More than physiological, they may not bring about a physiological change. You may not be feel very healthy, but at least you will feel energetic. Mentally you will not feel depressed. The mental energy, the more spiritual you become, the more your mental energy is elevated. That's why Swamiji says you have to use this kundalini and take it to higher and higher levels, so that your empowerment takes place at higher and higher levels of existence. Like you become mentally very strong. Physically, you may not become as strong as a wrestler, but your mind will compensate for that. Mentally, you will be so strong that you will be able to overcome all the difficulties. If you go still further, your buddhi will become so strong, your intuitive power will become so strong, so you don't have to strain yourself. Decision making will be easy. Discrimination, deciding what is good, what is bad, it becomes easy. You take the right decision at the right time. You see, that ability to take the right decision at the right time is a great art. It doesn't come just by manipulation. It doesn't come just by training. It has to come through intuition. That is why Swami Brahmanandji and all, when they did the spiritual practices, very often they would decide that they will start on a particular journey at an appointed time. And then finally they'll say, no, we will not go now. So some kind of intuition, they used to depend so much on intuition. Sometimes the sevaks used to get upset. Maharaj has planned everything and now he's suddenly cancelling his trip. So what is the problem? Why does he do that? So he made it a point that unless he got some kind of sanction from the higher intuitive power of the mind, he would not take a decision. I can give you a wonderful example of Swami Abhedananda, who was miraculously saved by Sri Ramakrishna. You see, he was a yogi, so he could hear voices. He could hear different visions. He had visions of different gods and goddesses. So one day he decided to go from Glasgow to take a ship to go to America. He had almost gone with the intention of buying a ticket, but somehow some visions told him some sound, because he could not see Thakur, but he could hear some sound as if Sri Krishna is asking him not to board, not to go, not to buy the ticket. So he just thought it is just an imagination. Perhaps there is some hallucination. So again he goes. Again there is a distinct voice. Then he realizes, so something is wrong. Sri Krishna is telling me not to go. So actually it was the intuitive power. Sri Krishna perhaps acted through the intuitive faculty of the human mind, of the mind of Abhedananda. By logically there was no logic why he should not buy a ticket, because he had already decided that he will be leaving for New York from Glasgow. So he decided to listen to his higher intuitive sound which he got. It was an external sound perhaps, or an internal sound, but somehow it reflected very sharply in his mind, and he decided not to go. And next day, when he opened the newspapers, he was surprised to know that the ship which left on that day was supposed to leave had capsized in the ocean, and all the people who were there, they had died. So if he had traveled, he would have died. Somehow Sri Ramakrishna intuitively communicated to him. And that is how these prophets, these great saints, they are, even today we can access them. What happens when we pray? What happens when we do japa? We are just connecting the kundalini which is rising, somehow gets connected to higher and higher levels of existence. And our decisions, our choices become much better. So that is why Sri Ramakrishna says these nerves, when with the effect of pranayama, when you regulate the prana, either through japa, through prayers, through karma yoga, or even through raj yoga, and through pranayama also. Just people practice pranayama, but the purpose should be clear. If you use it for improving your physiological condition, then it won't benefit much. So that's why Swamiji says that this nerves, this nerve currents will show some polarity. I mean, the signals which are now haphazard, that is why we get confused. It is so difficult for a young child to take the right decision. But with so much of training, so much of effort, we teach him intellectually, we teach him rationally to take the right decisions. But still, there is an amount of uncertainty. Many times we come at crossroads. We don't know which career to opt for. We don't know whether we should take up this job or that job. We neither do we have an intuition power to tell us what will happen in the future. So we just take a chance, we just take a random chance, because every time we can't be logical. Logically, certain things convince you, but then there are pros and cons to every decision that we take. Certain decisions are so difficult to take. So these yogis, what they do is, the higher they go up, higher their kundalini rises, the easier it becomes for them to take the right decision at the right time, and that saves a lot of trouble. So that is exactly what a guru is supposed to do, what a teacher or a prophet is supposed to do to the disciple. Because to take a decision based on a higher understanding, or from a higher vantage point, see, we take decisions based on gross and annamaya kosha, pranamaya kosha, and manomaya kosha level. Manomaya kosha is our mental level. So whatever our mind convinces us, and mind is not a reliable friend. You have to remember this. So Bhagavad Gita says the mind can be your friend and can be your enemy. If it decides to give you wrong advice, and if you don't use your discrimination, if you don't use your buddhi, the higher faculty of the mind, then the mind will give you wrong decisions. It will convey wrong decisions, and you'll accept it. And that is why we say we make mistakes. We make mistakes naturally, because we listen to the mind, we don't listen to the heart, we don't listen to the intuition. But how do we listen to the intuition? That intuitive faculty is activated only when you go up to that level, up to the Vijnanamaya Kosha level and above. So that requires a persistent effort, and that is the function of yoga. So Swamiji says this shows that when the willpower is transformed into nerve currents by this pranayama, by this japa, when you are doing an undercurrent of japa, many things happen. They control your emotional life, they balance, they make your emotional life harmonious, they control your mental life, the intellectual life, because you don't think random thoughts, you don't allow other random thoughts to come and disturb you and drain away your energy. They also help you to transform your willpower. That is what Karma Yoga is supposed to do. The willpower, the power of resolution, that if you decide to do something, you will do it. Now, that willpower is weak in most of the people. But this rise of Kundalini, when you do this, it shows that the nerve currents, when the will is transformed into these nerve currents, it is changed in something, it is changed to something like electricity. There is a wire without electricity, but when you do yoga, it is like a wire with electricity. Now it is much more powerful. That electricity, when it flows through the wire, is very powerful now. But before that, before you started spiritual practices, before you started pranayama, controlling the prana directly or indirectly, before you did that, the prana was not under your control. It was under the control of nature, it was under the control of other people. Somebody scolds you, somebody abuses you, somebody makes fun of you, and your prana gets disturbed because the prana is controlled by other people. The society controls your prana, whereas to a yogi doesn't bother what others speak of him, what others talk about him, whether others praise him or scold him or do anything. He is not affected because he does not allow their prana to interfere, because he is in control of his prana. So that is why the body, as it has become a gigantic battery of willpower. Just as focusing electricity through the wire or through the battery makes it a gigantic battery of electricity, so also the nerve currents, the willpower flows through these nerve currents and makes your body a gigantic uh, uh, a gigantic battery of willpower. This tremendous will is what exactly the yogi wants. The goal of yoga is to strengthen our willpower slowly and make it very strong. Make it very strong, just as you charge the device which you are using, you charge the battery. If the battery is stronger, then the equipment works properly. So our body is not working properly, our mind is not working, our subtle body and our gross body are not working properly because it has not been charged. Our willpower has not been, it's not flowing through the nerve currents. You know, the will has to flow through this nerve currents. The nerve currents are influencing our body now. External sensations, external words, external criticisms, external praises, all these things are influencing our nervous system, and we are like a lump of a body which is a slave to the outside world. So when you say you don't become worldly, that means you don't get influenced by the world. It's not that you don't live in the world. You can't avoid. Even a person who stays in a monastery or stays in a forest, he's still living in contact with somebody. He cannot be isolated. Nobody can be isolated. But the fact is that being worldly means being influenced by the world, allowing the prana of others, the prana of the universe to influence you. Whereas if you are in control with your prana, which the yogi's goal is to control your in prana in such a way that what happens to the prana outside will not affect you. So the tremendous willpower is what exactly, that is why this is a physiological explanation of the breathing exercise. Now people talk of the psychic prana, but they don't know that breathing is just a method. The willpower or the flow of the tremendous willpower to make a rhythmic flow the willpower rhythmically in the body and make it act beneficially make it in control of itself, make the body and the mind under the control of a person. To achieve that, pranayama is used as a starting point. So it is not just a breathing exercise. Breathing is just a means to achieve a higher goal, which is control of the mind. So and they help us through the respiratory center to control the other centers. Now, as I told you, there are 5 pranas. The one of the prana is controlling the respiratory organ, that is the lungs, and then there is the blood circulation, the heartbeat, and there's so many digestions. So each one is dependent on the other, and the control of prana directly or indirectly helps to regulate or create a kind of harmony, at least in the body to begin with. But that is not enough. Swamiji says to have a harmonious body or have a good health is not the goal of yoga. If that is the only case, then it is very easy. You just do yoga and pranayama, go on doing it, and you have a healthy body. Maybe you will live up to 100 years and with a healthy body and a healthy physique. But that's all. That's the maximum you can get. But unless that yoga or that pranayama is used not only for the body but also for the mind, then the real spirituality starts, the begins, and you go to higher and higher layers of the mind. So that's why Swamiji says the aim of pranayama in a general way is to uh, take this coiled up power of Kundalini from the Muladhara to the Sahasrara. If it goes up to Sahasrara, then we'll be like Sri Ramakrishna, we'll be like Buddha, we will get mukti. But even if it is raised to some significant level by the help of japa, by the help of prayer, by the help of karma yoga, by the help of bhakti yoga, if we do that, then to a significant level, then our life becomes more harmonious, more joyful, more empowered. Because it's like raising the electricity, charging the battery. Swamiji has given such a beautiful example, comparing the motion of molecules in a wire in electricity, a battery, which follows through the current. So pranayama is just charging our physiological battery, the human battery, and make us empowered. What is empowerment? When we say a person is empowered, he should be empowered not only physically but also mentally. His mind should be strong. His mind should be uh, always under his control, not under the control of other people. So that can come only if the Kundalini rises from the Muladhara. As long as it is in the lower 3 levels, it doesn't come to the center of the heart, you will find that the body is always controlling you, the lower forces are always controlling you, and we are not very much evolved from the animals. Only thing, we are intellectually much better than animals, that's all. But otherwise, spiritually speaking, we are still controlled by the lower 3 centers. But once the heart center opens, once the Swamiji says that aim of pranayama is to take it to higher and higher centers, not just harmonize the body, not just harmonize the physiological processes in the body, which is one small function of the prana regulation. So the Kundalini, when it raises, where does it go? What happens in that hollow? Now I told you that the nerve currents do not will be made, or the Kundalini will be made to pass through the hollow. So what happens? So hollow means space. So Swamiji now discusses 3 wonderful concepts. We have a very, very limited idea of space. He says there is one Mahakasha, there is one Chittakasha, mental space. Mahakasha is elemental space, the space that you see around you, the vacuum, the planets, the earth. You say vast space, vast fields. This is known as Mahakasha. It is elemental space. But there is another space for the yogis. When you say meditate in the heart, are we meditating in the Mahakasha? Are we meditating in the elemental space? No. It is known as Chittakasha or Chidakasha. Chittakasha means the mental space. Now, to give you an idea of mental space, you normally like open spaces, for example. But if your mind is disturbed, you take a very healthy person and take him to a very beautiful open space. Naturally, everybody, when he sees the sea or the vast fields open, he feels delight. When he sees the Himalayas, when you have a idea of huge spaces, large spaces, vast expanse of sea, vast expanse of fields, you get a wonderful feeling, because that is because the Chidakasha, the mental space also is becomes free. That's why people like to go to such places where they don't want to confine themselves. You know why we are detesting this lockdown? Because people are familiar with open spaces. If especially if one is spiritual or one has spiritual inclinations, he will always be. We would not like to become restrained in physical spaces. But Swamiji says that is not true. It's not just the physical space, you have to go to the mental space. A person who is locked within one room, if he can be mentally free, he can transcend physical elemental space and go to Chidakasha. So Holy Mother, for all practical purposes, was restricted to her small house in Jairambati. She never went out, she never went by train, she never went on cruises, she didn't go on long journeys. At least Thakur went. Of course, she went later on, but that was not her aim. She was literally forced to travel because there was no place for her to stay. So they had to go on pilgrimage, they had to go to Brindavan and all these places. But she was not fond. Shashi Maharaj, Swami Ramakrishna, he never believed in going to the Himalaya just for seeing the open spaces, because his mental space had opened. The Chidakasha was open. The Chittakasha and the Chidakasha, the knowledge space. There is a slight difference between Chittakasha, that is the mental space. Mental space means it is slightly lower than the knowledge space or Chidakasha, which is activated only when your buddhi becomes active. Now the problem is this difference between Chittakasha and Chidakasha. You have to remember, Chittakasha is a mental space. You know, when there is some kind of mental pressure for you to do something, you may be in the open space. You take a person in open space, but he is mentally a slave to somebody. He perhaps has some commitments which he has to do. Yes, some people are waiting for him, or maybe his home, there are some calamity has happened and he's worried. So that's why when Master Mashe came to Dakshineshwar, his friend thought by taking him to a beautiful vast garden and the beautiful flowing river, his mind will be free. Though he got a little glimpse of freedom in the elemental space or Mahakasha, but his Chittakasha, his mental space was restricted. His mental space was so much troubled with the troubled situation at the home. So he had carried that mind, even in the open space, he could not enjoy, because he is free from the Mahakasha point of view. He has come in an open space, nobody is there to bind him. He's not inside his home or inside his house, but his mind is enslaved. His mind is confined within certain problems, his family problems, his the tremendous turbulent times he was undergoing. There was a crisis in the family. So no matter whichever Mahakasha you choose, you go to the beach, you go to all the resorts, but your mind is still disturbed because you are carrying your Chitta Kasha with you, the mental space. So that is a slightly higher. So you have to be free, you have to be in the open, in the Mahakasha elemental space, but you have to be free in the mental space also. That is an essential quality before you start meditation. If your mind is confined and suffering from misery, and there's so many restrictions and limitations, so many pressures, then it can't be free. So it has the Chitta Kasha also has to be free. Then Swamiji says Chidakasha, that is a still higher, that is a higher kind of freedom, which is the freedom you feel when your buddhi awakens, when you go to the Vijnanamaya Kosha. Now that freedom, to give you a small hint, is felt when you feel it is very effortless to take the right decision at the right time. You see the intention, for example, people like Brahmananda, Ramakrishnananda, who always believed and always were connected to Thakur through their spiritual sadhana. So they were so content and so, they did not have any worry. No, they were never anxious. They had no worries because they took every decision as taken by Sri Ramakrishna. They used to consult and they used to get direct intuitive answers for them. They used to get intuitive signals or maybe intuitive decisions. So they did not have a conflict whether to do or not to do, as Shakespeare said, to be or not to be. So that existential problem did not exist for them. They were free in the sense they were free in the Chidakasha also. So decisions, their knowledge, their freedom came from a much higher level. So you have to be free at the Mahakasha level, but that is a very low kind of freedom. Being free in the physical world doesn't mean you will be free in the Chittakasha, mental world. You have to work your way hard to become mentally free and then finally become free in the Chidakasha also and take decisions or maybe uh, develop the power of intuition to take the right. So everything that we see, we imagine or dream, we have to perceive in space. See, even if you close your eyes, you have to perceive that Thakur is sitting or Siram, somebody is sitting, the Ishta is sitting, the God is sitting in the heart. So that idea of Mahakasha comes. You can't say that I will not think of the elemental space or the space as it is understood in the world. This is called Mahakasha or elemental space. When a yogi reads the thought of others or perceives supersensuous objects, he sees them in another sort of space which is known as Chittakasha, the mental space. And when the soul shines in its own nature, the bright, when you say, when you have to imagine Sri Krishna or the Ishta sitting in the seat of your heart, shining in the Chidakasha, that glorious uh, glow which you imagine, not just the physical glow, but that is known as the knowledge space. So you begin with the physical space, elemental space, the Mahakasha. Imagine Thakur sitting on a lotus or the Ishta sitting on a lotus, and you, when you start your meditating, you begin with a gross akasha, that is known as elemental space. Then you get different kinds of slightly higher kinds of experiences. That is, these happen in the chitta akasha, the mental space. And then you go to chidakasha, which is the knowledge space. So when the kundalini is aroused and enters the canal, all these perceptions are in the mental space. So when you say the kundalini power uh, uh, has risen, the kundalini power has risen by the force of your sadhana, what actually is happening is you are slowly transcending the gross and going into higher and higher levels of existence. You actually, all these visions, they are all these perceptions that you see, they are not in the physical space. You imagine Sri Krishna or the Ishta or all sorts of things you can imagine in the heart. They begin with physical space, but they get converted into Chittakasha. And then when it finally reaches, when it has reached the end of the canal, it goes up to Sushumna. Then it becomes objectless. It opens out into the brain and becomes objectless. And that is the real knowledge space. So now, Swamiji, much before the discovery of wireless, he made this analogy, gave this beautiful analogy. It is so surprising. How could Swamiji predict the existence or that in future people will be able to transmit this electric power or electricity or electric signals without wire, without wireless? So he says, taking the analogy of electricity, we find that man can send current only across a wire, along a wire. That was the idea when telegraph was there. When Swamiji was there, telegraphs were used to send cables, the signals, telegraphic signal through the sea. The cables were laid inside the sea, and there was no wireless communication. Wireless communication came much later. But Swamiji said, but nature requires no wires to send the tremendous nerve current. The mental currents, Swamiji said, does not require the media. It doesn't require physical media. Like you don't have to take up a phone, but it can be transmitted wirelessly also. So you see how Swamiji anticipated the wireless technology also in a way. But that was in the gross. But in the subtle, Swamiji knew that yoga has discovered the ways and means that these tremendous currents, nervous currents, can be sent through the mind at long distances. That is wireless transmission. But that is possible only if your Kundalini rises, and then you are not dependent on your nervous system for transmitting nervous energy. When you are free from that, when you use your own Sushumna canal to transmit this Kundalini Shakti or the power of Kundalini, then you will find that you will be able to help people across large distances. The limit is almost unlimited power, because you can see Sri Ramakrishna, Jesus, and all these great prophets even today. They can help people in a very subtle way by transforming things around people. They come to the help in very, very apparently miraculous ways, but there's no miracle. Actually, what is happening is the subtle prana of these people, of these great prophets, they're so powerful. All we need is to tune to that. And once we tune, you will find that the tremendous energy which they possess, they uh, they when you get access to those wonderful energy levels. So we I think it is time now almost. Is it time? We will just 1 minute. Yeah, we are just uh, so I think I'll conclude if there are some questions and answer sessions. Now all these things Swamiji is still discussing. In the next talk we will discuss about, because there are so many things which we discussed today, it requires some kind of revision. So I would request you to go through the Raj Yoga. The PDF file has been sent to you. You read the psychic prana again and again, and then if you come prepared, then you can ask some good questions, because this is a topic which you cannot just I mean, by one glance or one reading, you cannot understand. It's a very subtle thing. So whatever we have discussed today, just to make sure that all of you have understood or all of you have no doubts, I would leave this session open to question answers. So we'll have a quick session. So you just unmute yourself and ask. Yes. One at a time. Yes, Amit.
Swamiji,
Ask. Yes.
yes, you have you mentioned willpower, and recently I read that there's been a study to say that willpower is limited. So
Now, if you go on reading all the studies in the world, I can't help it. Nah, who studies that? Who's that person? If you get it on internet or WhatsApp and all those things, you can't trust everything. Nah, you just be careful what information you take in, you absorb. You see, Swamiji says our life is precious. So only read books written by people who have had realization. If you are really spiritually serious, one should not be wasting time in reading uncertain things, uncertain studies. Who said willpower? Swami very clearly says there is no limit to the willpower, because with this tremendous willpower, these prophets, they moved the whole world. Influence people, then they could influence people even today. So don't believe in other studies. There is no
okay,
study which is worth even. You should not even touch those books. The problem is those people, they have no authority and they just go on making some study and then telling you something. But the people who have had realization, it is safer to believe in their works and their. That's why Swamiji says books are infinite in number, time is limited. Only read those books which are written by people of realization. So they can't go wrong, their decisions are not wrong, their intuitions are not wrong, their ideas are not wrong. So we'll never be disillusioned by these people. Okay?
what my question is, Swamiji, is like I feel that my willpower can be quite weak.
Oh, yes.
How do I develop that willpower to be strong?
That is a reasonable question. But when you said the willpower is limited, limited, yes, it is limited because we don't exercise our will. First of all, the Swamiji says, na, it is like a battery. Now, if you use a 2 volts battery, the power will be less. You just increase the charge of that battery. The how to charge? He has given the hint very clearly. Has given an analogy that the more japa you do, the more pranayama you do, the more prana is under your control, and your battery gets charged. As simple as that. The stronger the battery, the stronger the will. You know, if you want a particular voltage, you choose a very powerful battery, isn't it? Huh?
Yeah.
So the analogy is something similar. If you feel, that means somewhere you're getting discharged. I mean, the battery is been discharged, you charge it. It's Swamiji himself said when he was in America, he expended a lot of energy. So when he came to India, he wanted some quiet time, so that he can charge his batteries and then go back to teach. So even great people feel that they lose that charge. So it's not unusual. It happens. Willpower will be down, but then to make it strong, you have to follow charge your battery. Charging the battery for a spiritual aspirant is to uh, follow to do as much japa or do as much sadhana as possible, or to do as much pranayama as possible. Because according to yoga, prana increases the willpower, by increase the focusing the nerve currents. The nerve currents are focused in a particular direction, not only in the body but also in the mind. So the mind becomes strong. When the mind becomes strong, its willpower increases. So you got the point. The answer is very simple. You have to do focus more on your spiritual practices. Spiritual practices are meant to increase the willpower. There is no other purpose. To make it as strong as the prophets. Of course, it won't be as strong as those people, but we can align. We can align our willpower to their willpower. That is known as Sharanagati. When a person performs Sharanagati, he depends on the will of the Lord to supplement his weak will. What he can't do, he will allow his humility and his ability to expose his will to the will of the Lord. That is done through Bhakti Yoga. So you can do through Bhakti Yoga. If you have faith in Raj Yoga, then you do pranayama, you do exercises, you do japa. If you believe in Jnana Yoga, then you do read the Shastras through Nidhi Dhyasana. Because Shravana will not help you, Manana also will not help you. After that, you come to the third step, where the Guru says you have to assimilate or meditate on the teachings which you have read. So you have to do Nidhi Dhyasana, which is just like meditation of Raj Yoga. Okay? So that is the only way to increase the willpower. Any more questions?
I have a question.
Yes, yes.
Like when Kundalini rises to the Sahasrara, that is the state of realization, isn't it?
Yes, that is you get disconnected from the body. That is known as Samadhi. When Samadhi happens, your nervous system does not require, your body does not require the nervous system to transmit energy. All the nervous current, the Kundalini flows through the hollow. So when it flows through the hollow, your body gets disconnected. Your mind gets disconnected from the mind. Your soul gets disconnected from the body. That's why Thakur Sri Ramakrishna, when he went into Samadhi, his body became motionless. It became dead for all practical purposes.
So if it happens,
it never happens in ordinary people.
That's
Samadhi happens only once. Once means normally, in most of the cases, Sri Ramakrishna himself said, once you pass out into Samadhi, you don't come get a body back. So you just forget. We can't hope to get Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and once we get it, we can't come back to tell what it is. So only for Sri Ramakrishna, maybe that was the divine purpose. So he could remain in the state of Bhav-mukha. If you read the gospel, if you read the great master, there is a state of Bhav-mukha where certain special people, special incarnations, they go into Samadhi, but then they come back, and they come back to teach the world. So other than that, for most ordinary, if not for almost all ordinary people, Samadhi is the final goal. I mean, after that, there is no coming back.
And this happens in Raja Yoga, but
No,
those
all yoga, all yoga. Bhakti also leads to the same samadhi. See, the ways are different. Karma yoga also may give rise to nirvikalpa samadhi. Jnana yoga also can give rise to nirvikalpa. Raj yoga explains it scientifically. That's all.
so in all the yoga forms, they will reach. People will reach.
Yeah, Kundalini will be, the process is the same. Like whether you are a black or whether you are a colored person or a white person, the blood and the heart and the physiological functions don't change. So whichever yoga you follow, the physiological effects, the rise of Kundalini, everything will happen in the same way. But in some cases, it is unconsciously it happens. In Raj Yoga, you consciously meditate on the Kundalini, and the Tantras you constantly consciously meditate on the Kundalini. But if a Bhakti Yoga, he says, I don't know anything about Kundalini, I don't bother, I just know my God, my mother, and my child. That's what Thakur did. Na? Sri Ramakrishna said, I don't want all this knowledge. I just know my mother is there. So that is Bhakti Yoga. I and my mother. There is no other person necessary for him. So the devotion was so strong that automatically the Kundalini rises in such a bhakta. Whether he practices Raj Yoga or not, whether he practices Karma Yoga or not, every yoga will result in the rise of Kundalini.
That's it.
Any more?
Maharaj, I've got a question, Maharaj.
Yes. Who is asking?
Sumana from Edinburgh.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Maharaj, so we have heard about this Kundalini awakening in Kathamrita also, and Swamiji also speaks about Kundalini often. So Maharaj, like for spiritual, like normal spiritual seekers, Maharaj. So which comes like, does the spiritual practice awaken the Kundalini, or to rise the Kundalini, somebody has to practice spiritual practice
The same thing, no? You're telling the same thing. If you practice spiritual practices, if you do, the Kundalini has to rise. There's no other way, no?
So much for some, so other forms like in Hatha Yoga and all. So isn't it in a
They
different?
also do some kind of practice. You see, they may not do bhakti or they may not do Raj Yoga, they may do Hatha Yoga, they may do, in some people, they may use other forms, we don't know there are so many ways to write. Sometimes it gets accidentally awakened also, but it is dangerous. Swamiji says, if an untrained yogi, the Kundalini rises, then it can cause havoc when it comes down. It's okay when it is up, but when it comes down, it can make that person miserable and it can make other persons miserable. So it is always better to get the Kundalini raised in a very scientific and a normal way. Through sadhana, through spiritual practices, whatever it may be. It doesn't necessarily have to be Raj Yoga. It can be any yoga, any religion, any sect, even through Christianity. I mean, if you are a Christian, if you pray, the process is same, physiological process is same, because they also have the same body. Though they may not accept, they may not give this kind of explanation that the Kundalini is rising. They'll say the grace of God is flowing. That's all. They may say the grace of God has come. Even Jesus had this power, Kundalini. Otherwise, how could he give rise to all these miracles? And he could do so many things, so many wonderful things he did. So that is definitely, but he did not use the word Kundalini. It is nothing but the rise of a spiritual power, the focusing of the nervous energies which we are normally using on the body. Our nervous energy is going out in hundreds of ways through actions which do not focus it. Anything that focuses your nervous energy and makes it flow in one particular direction, that will give rise to the rise of Kundalini. Now, not that we don't have the capacity, we are wasting our nervous energy. That's all. It's a very simple thing. So the less you waste, the more energy you have. It's like a battery getting discharged, you know. You have a battery, but there are so many connections. And some of you're not using it for the main purpose. You're using it for other purposes. Then the battery goes down very fast. You connect one battery to 5 mobiles, then definitely it will be discharged faster. So it's something like that. The power of Kundalini is there for all of us, but it depends on how much you use and how you, I mean, use it for a productive reason.
Okay, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maharaj, I have one question.
Yes,
Maharaj, Shikha Sarkar from Ahmedabad.
yes.
What is the difference between Swavikalpa Samadhi and Nirvikalpa Samadhi?
Okay. So that that topic we will come when we discuss the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Nirvikalpa means there is no vikalpa. I mean, there is no thought process involved at all. You got it. Vikalpa means you have a object. So nirvikalpa is a state where the mind completely gets destroyed. It does the as Swamiji said, when it passes through the Sahasrara, your body, the connection between the body, the mind, and the subtle body and the soul, the Jivatma, is totally cut off. You become one with the Paramatma. So there is no question of any vikalpa. And vikalpa means there is no thought wave rising in your body. When Sri Ramakrishna went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, he could neither breathe nor do anything of the action which a normal human being does. Whereas if you are in Savikalpa Samadhi or if you are in any kind of other Samadhi, maybe the breathing will continue, the heartbeat will continue, you can feel everything. The total disconnection doesn't happen. That's the difference. To put it in a very simple way.
Well, Maharaj.
Yes.
There is another question, Maharaj.
Yes.
Why from our mind? Mind is basically a matter, no? It's basically a subtle matter. Our mind.
Minor matter. Yes. Yes.
So why from it get the energy? Does it get the energy from the prana?
No, yeah, the prana only. Prana, the different pranas. You see, nervous energy is one prana, breath is one prana. So the mind gets power from all the 5 pranas. Suppose you don't eat food, so the food will not be assimilated and the prana becomes weak. If you don't breathe properly, then the prana becomes weak. So if the nervous energy, I mean, some spinal damage is there, then the nerve currents don't flow properly, then that prana becomes weak. So the mind definitely gets all its. Mind is nothing but a finer sense organ. Manomaya kosha, if you know, it is a slightly higher form of body only. So the mind is also material and it gets all its energy from, you see, that's why we say the mind is happy when you take, even some people induce happiness through drugs. They take some substance and so that is, even the body has got some effect on the mind. But it is mainly the prana. See, for a very gross person, pain in the body will affect the mind immediately. For everybody, or most of us, we are dependent on body also.
Yes.
So changes in body, Annamaya kosha, changes in Pranamaya kosha, or any disharmony in these koshas will cause a disharmony in the mind. You got it? They're all connected.
Yes. Thank you.
Maharaj, I have a question.
Yes.
Now we have all this psychic healing, Reiki,
Yes.
all these are long distance healing. So does one presume it happens to the Chittakasha?
Yeah, Chittakasha, because the prana is there, na? The prana, when it is the force, see, prana is just a force. It is just like nuclear force, electric force. Now, electric force and all these forces can be used for positive purposes, negative purposes. Isn't it? You can use nuclear force to destroy.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
use nuclear force to generate energy. Now, that depends on the mind. So, when you take the prana and the mind uses it for healing, it is known as Reiki or it is known as pranic healing They call it pranic healing. They don't say it is mental healing, because mind cannot heal by itself. That is the wrong idea, that I can mentally send waves and heal you. My mental, the mind takes some resolution, like in Reiki, for example, or any other pranic healing technique. You focus on the patient, and the prana actually goes and heals that person. It is the prana energy which goes and heals. The mind has taken a resolution. It is using its willpower. So no doubt it is playing an important role, decision-making role, how to heal, what to heal, how to effect, and all those things. But it is the prana which does the healing. Swamiji discussed it in the previous class, I think, when he discussed about prana. He says all these great prophets, they have control over their prana. That's why they can influence people, not just mind. Because even to control the minds and have this influence, you need the help of prana to travel over long distances. It is like you have nuclear energy here, or you have a battery, but unless you transmit that energy over a period, whether through wire or through wireless, whatever it is, you have to transmit that, isn't it? When the transmission takes place, then only you can see the effect. So pranic healing, they are very much true, but I don't know how much all people who claim to heal through prana, whether they are really doing through that. It may be coincidence also. They may not be using their prana at all. And somehow the faith will not heal, but some faith, induces some kind of changes in prana of the patient. So the patient himself may be healing himself. You got that idea? Now, sometimes that's why they say the placebo effect. You just give a placebo and tell people that I have given you a very powerful drug, and it sometimes heals. You have seen that. Placebo effect is very famous in allopathy also. So these placebos work not by faith. They work with the faith which affects the prana. So I take a placebo, and with having full faith in the doctor, and doctor says, I've given you a very powerful drug. It is just a sugar pill, and I take it, and I convince my mind, and my mind convinces my prana, and my prana heals. You got it? That's how
Yeah.
it functions. That is how it functions in the on the physical level.
So that you sort of partly answered the question that follows this explanation. So a good pranic healer who seems to have got quite a bit of success, can one assume that there is a lot of spiritual discipline done there to come up to this level?
No. Absolutely no connection with spirituality, because this pranic healing is dealing only with the manomaya and the lower koshas. So very clearly, Swamiji cleared the confusion right from the beginning. Kundalini will rise when you transcend the body. The moment you use it for bodily purposes, you're just using a superior, worldly technique. That's all. You are using homeopathy. You are using allopathy. Each one is working in a different way. Each one is effective. Ayurveda also works. The herbs work in a different way. And here you are using your mind to cure. So they don't have to be spiritual at all. Because you see, it is a question of practice. Now it's like just like saying to become a wonderful surgeon, you have to be a highly spiritual. There's no connection, because you can be a surgeon without being spiritual. What does a surgeon do actually? A surgeon uses his prana in the external world in such a way that he can do very delicate surgery in a very beautiful way. So they don't have to be spiritual to become a good surgeon. You see the heart operations, there are some highly skilled people. Does that mean because you are not using that skill or prana for purposes higher than the Annamaya Kosha and the Pranamaya Kosha, the Manomaya Kosha, then it still becomes a secular achievement. Secular in the sense a lower achievement. You can't say secular strictly, but it is just like a skill. I would in fact tell, if there is a pranic healer here and an expert surgeon, I would put them on the same, a very good pranic healer. I mean, if he is a very expert pranic healer and a very good allopathic surgeon with absolutely no faith in religion or spirituality, who never practices, they are on equal footing. I mean, if they cure, both are equally good, isn't it? One does it through allopathy, another does it through homeopathy, and the third one does it through pranic healing. So they are good doctors, they are good, very skilled human beings. But we don't have to assume that one has to have spirituality, because spirituality by definition itself doesn't deal with the lower koshas. They have nothing to do. That's why people, they get misled when they see the miracles. That's why Thakur never liked miracles. Now we respect, if anybody respects Jesus because he cured certain people, then they are missing out his spirituality. Jesus even would not say, he said God and mammon cannot be had by the same, you cannot have God and mammon. So how can you talk of, he did it, maybe if it was necessary in that age to attack people, but then his central message, core message was spiritual. But you may say this healing and other prana and all those things has no relationship with spirituality. A spiritual man can be a spiritual healer, but a spiritual healer does not necessarily have to be a spiritual person.
Okay.
Converse
So it's
is
only
not
a
true.
matter of skill.
Converse is not true. The spiritual person normally would not use his spirituality for these lower purposes. Huh? Even Thakur offered Swamiji, do you want these spiritual powers? You use it. But he said, if I use those material powers, will I become spiritual? So Thakur said, no. So that clearly shows that they are not compatible at all. I mean, the moment you start using it for physical purposes, the spirituality goes down. Your battery gets discharged, as I said.
Okay.
You can't have spirituality, a fixed spiritual development, and then use it for material purposes, and then still continue to grow spiritually. So it both can't happen. And it's like going simultaneously to the east and to the west. One is going down, the other is going up, so they are diametrically opposite. But it works, definitely it works. Just as any allopathy or any other medicine system works, it also works.
So it's only a matter of skill, this is, rather than any spirituality.
You're just manipulating the prana for your physical or physiological benefit.
Thank you, Maharaj.
It is true, definitely it is scientific and true. That's why Raj Yoga discusses all these things. It even discusses that these powers can be increased, can be used for many purposes, but then it at the same time warns that in that case you'll get stuck at that level. You'll be no doubt curing a lot of people, helping a lot of people, but then your spiritual progress will suffer.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Anybody? So shall we close or? Any more question or?
Is Ashok here?
Yes, please.
When you do the prayers for somebody who's unwell,
Yes.
can that also heal people?
As I told you, prayer, pranic healing, all these things fall under the category of medicine. See, if you use prayers for these things, it can definitely heal. It can heal, and compassionate people do that also. But one can't say, that depends on who prays and what is the control of the pranic shakti in him. If his prayers are effective, then he has to have some kind of empowerment himself, isn't it? So everybody, if they pray, it will not have the same effect. If a person without any faith or without any matter substance in him, if he prays, what difference? Yeah, so people may pray because if their near and dear ones are there, and many times it definitely helps also. Prayer can be very powerful because what it does, it connects your prana to the universal prana. Whom do you pray actually? God, isn't it? So when you pray to God, the power of prana of God, if we are tuned to that prayer and the prayer is proper, then the prayer, the prana of the Ishta or the God or the deity whom you worship actually heals. It's not that your prayer heals. You do your job, you pray. So that's why when somebody is sick in the family, we say just go and pray to God. And when people who they have faith, they pray. Otherwise, they'll say, "What will happen if we pray? Nothing is going to happen." So if they don't have faith, then it may not happen. So there's no harm in praying for anybody. Praying, in fact, you are supposed to pray for the entire world, for the happiness. So prayer can be very useful subjectively also. If it not only helps the other person, because you are asking God to help, isn't it? You are not using your powers to heal somebody. You are just asking God, or you are praying to God that God be please compassionate on XYZ, because we are helpless, we can't do anything. At least you interfere and be compassionate enough and cure that person. So that can be a very unselfish prayer. But Thakur even did not like that. When some people approached him, he said, I can't pray to Mother, because he knew that that is not the greatest help one can give others. He believed that one can help better spiritually by making one more spiritual rather than just healing him. So that depends on different teachings. Some lower prophets or lower saints, they use their prayers and miraculous powers for curing people, and people go after them. No, there's no doubt that it works. But they are using their energy in that way. It is fine for them. So there are different categories of prayers. Okay?
Thank you.
So I'll take your leave now. So we'll say the mantra. Om Namasri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swami Tapahari.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj. Pranam.
Maharaj.